This sideboard was a part of a big hutch I found on Facebook Marketplace. Those two pieces spent over 50 years together, so it was time to get separated for good. Hi everybody, welcome to another makeover. At the first glance, this sideboard looks like it's in pretty good shape, but if you have a closer look, it's not as pretty as it seems to be. Those beautiful knobs created less beautiful circles, the scratches on the surface, which is going to be a pain in my butt if I wanted to keep the drawers wooden. Those knobs I liked, even if they caused the damage, but I hated these handles. The top has lots of scratches. I'm not gonna lie, some of them were caused by us while we were moving, but most of them came with the piece. I started with removing the top drawers and immediately found out that one of the wooden guy was completely trashed. I'm gonna tell you a secret here. Building a new wooden slider is my second least favorite part of any makeover. The first one is cleaning. Oh well, order replacement on Amazon. That was probably what some of you were about to think, but this dresser was built about 50 years ago and there's no replacement on Amazon. I checked 3 times. One wise person said, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. You're hearing my voice now, that means I didn't get killed while I was building the sliders. I guess I'm stronger now. I removed the hardware and gave this dresser a quick but really good clean, and I was about to grab my stripper, but then I decided to do an alcohol test. I put some methyl hydrate on the top to see if the top was sensitive to alcohol, and it was. Methyl hydrate didn't dissolve it like it would do with shellac, but the top coat started peeling. And that means I can handle it without stinking in my garage up. To prevent methyl hydrate from splashing and dripping, I covered the surface, the section I was going to work with some shop towels. Then I poured methyl hydrate over the towels and I left it for about 5 minutes. I could have used methyl hydrate the same way as a stripper, but I would have to go over the top 2 or 3 times because after the first application, I wouldn't be able to take off all the top coat. This way, I let the methyl hydrate to penetrate into the surface and soften the top coat. Then I moved my shop towels and used the scraper to scrape off the finish. I don't cover the whole top at once because, first of all, I don't want to use that much shop towels and produce more garbage than I needed. Working in the sections gives me the possibility to reuse the same towels I just used on the previous section. The sides I did the same way I did the top, and again I reused the towels I just used on the top. It was a little bit awkward and I needed a little bit more of methyl hydrate, but it was doable. And again the same technique and the same towels on the doors. I didn't do the drawers fronts because I found out that the finish was pretty thin and I would be good with sanding. I didn't like those wooden elements on the top drawers. I mean, I did like them, they made out of solid walnut, but I wanted them off the dresser because I think they were making the dresser looking a little bit outdated. I was not planning on removing the trims around the edges first, but then I decided that it would be better without it and I had in mind something different for this trim for my next project. With the first drawer, everything went nice and smooth. I was able to remove all trims and those brad nails, there were lots of them, but that's okay. I was able to hammer them down and remove them from the other side of the drawer front. But the second drawer, oh my gosh, those brad nails, they were sitting so tight in their places, I couldn't hammer them down because they were bending over. Initially, I was planning on saving that walnut veneer on the drawer fronts, but with the screwage out, I took my grinder and I made lots of holes in the surface. And that didn't give me any other option but painting those top drawers. To cover those holes I just made, I mixed my favorite epoxy glue from Dollar Store and I added some wood chips. I was gonna paint the drawer fronts, they covered with veneer, walnut veneer, and it has a wood grain. So I was hoping that those wooden chips, they will give me a little bit grainy look, not just a smooth look like epoxy. It did work texture-wise, but here I made one little mistake. I didn't put enough epoxy in some spots and some holes. It looked like I did because of the wood chips, but it turned out that I didn't, and at the end, it will cause me some troubles. I underestimated the amount of the dents I made and I ran out of epoxy, and I decided to do an experiment and fill up whatever was left with some wood filler. I left epoxy to harden, and meanwhile I mixed some Bonda to do the repair on the side of the dresser. There was a pretty big chip. Sometimes I use the same epoxy mixture with the sawdust or sanding dust for repairs like this, because adding some sawdust makes the epoxy stainable and it stains pretty much the same color as the wood. But on vertical surfaces, I would have to build like a mold for the epoxy because it has a pretty runny consistency. So sometimes it's just easier for me to use Bonda on the vertical surfaces because it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't move. I also used Bonda to fill in a couple of cracks inside of the sideboard. While everything was hardening and drying, I sanded the top with 120 grit sandpaper. I also sanded one of my top drawers, the good one, with 120, and then I filled in the holes with my wood filler. The reason why I patched the holes not before sanding but after is because those holes from brad nails, they were not smooth, the edges were pretty rough, and I didn't want to do a double job to fill in the holes, then sand, and then find out that there is still some small tiny holes here and there. By that time the epoxy had hardened and I sanded my bad drawer. I still had some holes I missed from the brad nails, so I filled them in with the same wood filler. And see what I meant? I started stripping the top coat, but it was so thin, so it didn't make any sense. Because with 120, it's coming off like it's nothing. The veneer on the doors was so thin, so I sanded through it on one door in one spot. More sanding on the sides of the sideboard, and we are done with 120. As you can see, the base was still there, but the legs were missing. I never built the legs like this before for that type of base, but it doesn't seem to be complicated. And by the way, building the legs is the part that I really enjoy. I disassembled the base and I took it apart as much as I could, because this way it's easier for me to work with. I sanded the base with 180 because there was not much of the top coat. And then I made some repairs like splitted wood or separated veneer. And then I started the next round of sanding, but that time it was a hand sanding with 180 grit. The top and the sides I sanded twice with 180, first with my orbital sander and then with my hands, but I didn't catch it on camera. The doors I hand sanded and then I poured some mineral spirit over it to see the damage, and it was looking pretty bad. And I started thinking about painting them. I didn't want to do that, but look at this. There was some discoloration on the drawer fronts because of the old handles. I tried to use an oxalic acid even if I knew that it was not going to do anything, but it's always worth to try. So I applied it and I left it to dry, and meanwhile I did some repairs on the top. I had those wax sticks. I inherited them from my mother-in-law and they were pretty old. I think they were originally from Walmart, like a first generation of those wax sticks. I had a walnut stick, but it was way too dark, and the others were fruitwood and maple. So I mixed them all together using this tool I don't even know the name of. I melted mostly fruitwood, then I added some darker, the walnut, and a little bit of maple. Then I let it to dry, and then I scraped it on this little chip I wanted to patch. And then I melted it again using the same tool. Once the wax was fully dried, I cut the excess using this sharp blade, and then I sanded it with 180. Initially, I was going to keep those original knobs, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't that great idea. They already caused some damage on the drawer fronts and the door fronts, so even if I use new screw and I get them tight enough, I think it wouldn't do any difference. That's why I decided to go for totally different hardware, and I needed to plug those old holes. Well, I kept postponing this as much as I was able to, but anyways, I had to do that. All I needed to do was pretty much to cut the piece of wood of the size and thickness I needed, and then to make those grooves on both sides of that piece. And the slider was done. And yes, I am definitely feeling stronger than I was before. I drilled the hole for the screw, and I rounded the edges on the front part just for the aesthetic sakes. And here we go, it is ready to be installed. I also cut 4 legs out of the wood I had on hand, but my camera stopped filming. Here you see me shaping the front legs because I didn't want them to have just a simple rectangle shape. No matter how tight the plugs sit in the holes, there is always some little holes around the plug. I like to fill them using the CA glue and spray with an activator. It's way easier for me and it works better than any wood filler. These drawer fronts I was gonna keep wooden and I needed to blend in those plugs. I had a head piece of walnut veneer, really thin, like a paper thin walnut veneer. I decided to make a round patches and I did my best trying to match the pattern of the wood grain in the area I was going to patch. I cut little circles and I glued them using CA glue. It did look okay, but not as good as I expected. And around those circles, there were little gaps or holes. I had to fill them in with the wood filler. Once the wood filler dried, I sanded the area with 180 grit, and that's how it looks. Not ideal, still have lots of work of blending in, camouflaging, color matching. A little bit more sanding here. I needed to sand my legs with 180 grit sandpaper and whatever I had left with drying wood filler. I know most of people hate sanding, but I don't mind it. I wouldn't say it's my favorite thing to do, but like I said, I don't mind it and I even enjoy it if it's sanding the flat surfaces. That is probably a weird thing to say, but I'd rather sand than clean. To be able to do a better color matching, I wipe the drawer with some mineral spirit because it gives me the color closest to what I'm going to have once I put the top coat on. For blending, I'm using a furniture restoration kit from Amazon. I'm not super happy with that kit. It works, but it's not great. There's many different colors of the wood fillers in there, and some of those wood fillers, once they dry, they give that glossy look and it's 100% visible. With this kit, I found out that my color matching looks better if I use water-based polyurethane, but if I use any oil-based product, it doesn't look that great. Right now, I'm testing the other product on different project, and it seems like it works great, but as soon as I'm done testing, I'll share with you my results. I assembled my base next and moved on to the fun part. And it's fun because I did it for the first time. Whatever I do for the first time, it's always fun. To be able to install the legs, I had to pre-drill the holes in them in the angle and then to put bolt in there. Like I said, I was doing it for the first time, so please don't judge me hard here. I know now that I had to round it the edge. I was going to drill, but I didn't know it back then. I did one leg at the time. I clamped it from the both sides so it sits nice and tight and it doesn't move. And then I drilled the hole through the existing hole in my base. And for some reason, this leg, I clamped it from the both sides. It wasn't moving, but it didn't fit at the end. The other legs, I only clamped from one side and they were sitting perfectly. Next, I installed the inserts for the bolts. I know there is some special bolts that you can screw them into the wood, but I didn't have them on hand, so I used whatever I had. And it worked for me just fine. I sanded the patches I made with Bonda inside of the cabinets and I scalp sanded the rest to get it ready for paint. And I also cleaned the cabinet after sanding to prevent any sanding dust in my paint job. I wanted to paint my piece, like not all of it, but the parts, in a dark gray color, which I didn't have on hand, but I was about to mix it. To prevent any bleed through situation and for better adhesion, I always use primer. Not always, but most of the time. Here I'm using BN2 primer. It's an alkyd version, not shellac version, but it seems like it works pretty much the same way as the shellac version, at least to me. I taped the areas I didn't want my paint to go on. For that, I like using purple Scotch tape or yellow frog tape. I primed inside of the sideboard and I also primed the edges of the doors and the bottom drawers, and I primed the whole top drawers. But I guess I did it off camera because I can't find the footage of me doing that. I pictured the sideboard in a dark gray color with some greenish undertone. I had on hand the same bare alkyd enamel paint in black, green, and white color. I started mixing the colors and I made a huge mistake. I added too much white. I added more black, but at the end I didn't have enough of black to make the color as dark as I wanted it to be. But it looked pretty good, so I decided to give it a try. Before painting, I lightly sanded the surface with a sanding pad. I think it was 320, just to smooth it out. So here's the color and it looks greenish in the video, but it actually was more gray. I applied it and I was hoping that it's gonna dry even darker. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I liked the color, but that was not the color I wanted for this piece. So I went to the store, grabbed the black paint, and repainted everything with it. There we go, I like it way better now. I ended up applying 2 coats of black paint except for this one top drawer. Once I was done painting and I was attaching the hardware, I noticed that some of the dents I filled in, they were visible still. And at the beginning of the video, I told you that something wrong went with the epoxy wood filler, but right now, looking through the footages, I found out there was a dent I filled up with the wood filler. I guess the wood filler shrank because I didn't notice it while I was sanding, and I even didn't notice it while I was painting because you can only see it at a certain angle. Like right now I can see it in the video, but I couldn't see it from the angle I was painting the drawer. And the most frustrating thing was that I only noticed it while I was taking the final pictures for the client. It wasn't the end of the world or biggest deal ever. I was completely honest with the client and I told her that I can give her a discount or I can redo the whole drawer, but she would have to wait a little bit longer. She decided to wait and I fixed the drawer, even if it took me some time because, you know, it's always easier to patch the bigger hole than this surface kind of dance. And sorry, when something goes wrong at the very end, I get frustrated and I forget to film stuff. Next time, if I make the same or any other mistakes, and I know I will because I never make the same mistake twice, I make it 5 or 6 times just to be sure. So next time, I'll try not to get frustrated and I'll film it for you. Remember that I told you that the first leg I drilled the hole in didn't fit perfectly, so I had to adjust that hole using that insert and it wasn't sitting deep enough in the leg. To keep that insert in place, I decided to put some epoxy, yes, epoxy again. And while the epoxy was hardening, I stained other 3 legs. I did it in 2 stages. First, I applied salmon water-based wood stain in the color American Walnut and I let it dry. And then over it, I applied oil-based wood stain, very thin oil-based wood stain in the color Early American. My legs were made out of elm, not out of walnut, but the combination of those 2 stains gives me the perfect color match to walnut. And again, here I'm doing something weird probably, but hear me out. There is a product out there, it's called Restore Finish. Many of you probably know this product and you know that it's used for restoring a finish, an old finish. This product is the mixture of different solvents and it dissolves the top layer of your top coat with the scratches on it. That is how it works. And it could be clear or tinted in different colors like walnut, oak. And if you apply it to the surface with no top coat on it, it works as a solvent-based wood stain. It doesn't do anything to the surface except of tinting it. It doesn't improve the quality of the surface, but I just love how it works as a stain for walnut. The only thing is, if you want to apply a water-based top coat over it, you would have to let it dry at least for 3 hours because I think there is an oil component in there. But other than that, it works great. I can't tell you why I use different tape on doors and the drawer fronts, but I did it. And once I took it off, they were a little bit of primer and gray paint underneath. That's why I always follow the rule paint before stain, because I can sand this excess of the paint anytime, but if my surface was stained, it would be a big problem. I could have applied some top coat to seal the edges of the tape, but I didn't because I wasn't sure what kind of top coat I'm going to be using at the end. Once I made this mistake, I worked on the piece and I wanted to seal it with some oil. I taped the area I wanted to paint and I sealed the edges with shellac, which wasn't a great idea because shellac is so snaky. But even if I did it with some poly, I would still have the edges with a little bit of poly and it would be visible once I applied my oil. With that piece I was talking about, I had to redo the whole top. And since then, I never sealed the edges of the tape if I'm not sure what kind of top coat I'm going to be using. And with that piece, I also figured that if you use the right tape, you don't have to seal the edges. And by the right tape, I mean yellow frog tape or purple scotch tape. Those two worked for me. I sanded the excess of the paint from the edges with 180 grit sandpaper, and then I applied my Restore Finish stain. In some areas, the primer went deep into the wood grain. I didn't see it while I was sanding, but once I applied the Restore Finish, it popped out. Instead of resanding those small sections again and risking to ruin the paint job, I decided to blend them in with my restoration kit. With the doors, I had more work to do. First, I wanted to paint them, but then I decided to do my best to try to restore them. I don't have those lacquer toners, and in the area where I live, it's not that easy to find them and buy. I can order them online, but it's impossible to order just one or two because there is a minimum order of $200, and I don't want to spend that amount of money just on toners. And with repairs like this, I would have to apply so many coats of them, and it would cover the wood grain, which I don't like. The most satisfying part of refinishing furniture for me is to strip off those layers and layers of toner and lacquer and enhance the wood grain using some oil. And I also try to work with whatever I have on hand or whatever is available. That's why, again, I'm using my furniture restoration kit from Amazon. And there is no much to tell about this color matching or color blending job. I just try to do what I can to do and follow the wood grain, follow the wood color. The only rule I follow, I put some lighter color like a base first, and then I add some shades and darker colors. I'm blending the colors a little bit lighter on purpose because I know that wood filler, it dries and becomes darker. That's how my doors look after, let's call it paint job, because I literally painted the wood grain. I can say that I was 100% happy with that, but anyways, I sealed it with shellac first and I left it to dry. The shellac I used, it was my homemade shellac and it was not as concentrated as the shellac from the store. And yeah, my repair looked terrible once shellac is wet, but once it's dried, it's gonna be blended in perfectly. After the first coat of the shellac dried, I applied oil-based, very thin wood stain in the color Early American. I did it to the door fronts and to the doors as well, but I didn't film the whole process. I thought I did, but my camera said no, you didn't. I left the stain to dry for about 3 to 4 hours and then I sealed it again with shellac. I also had some areas to repair on the top and I did it with the same restoration kit. And once all that was done, I was finally ready to apply the top coat. And because I already used shellac on the doors and the door fronts, I decided to go with the water-based polyurethane. Usually I use a flat finish, but recently I started liking satin finish better. Once shellac dried, I lightly sanded the doors and the door fronts with 400 grit sandpaper and applied the same polyurethane. And yes, you can apply water-based finish over shellac with no problem. To the doors and the door fronts, I applied 2 coats of polyurethane with lightly sanding in between coats. I didn't apply any poly to my painted door fronts because the paint I use, it already has built-in top coat. I was about to attach my legs to the base and then I realized that the base is way lighter than the legs. To match the color, I applied salmon water-based stain to the base and the color was American walnut. Yeah, way better now. I attached the legs and I applied 2 coats of poly to the legs and to the base. I told you that I applied Early American wood stain to the doors and to the drawers, but I didn't apply it to the top and the sides of the dresser. I thought it wouldn't be noticeable, but it was, at least to me. To fix that, I decided to dye my polyurethane. Yes, I decided to make some type of toner out of polyurethane. I added a little bit of water-based stain in the color American Walnut and a little bit in the color Amaretta to get that early American color. I applied this mixture to the top and the sides of the sideboard and I did it with a foam brush as usual. I tried to do it very carefully along the wood grain, but once it's dried, I still had some streaks here and there. I did it before, but it was a birch, and birch doesn't have that intense wood grain as walnut has, and it looked great on the birch. In an ideal situation, you would have to apply it with a sprayer, but right now I don't have room in my shop for spray painting. To fix it, I lightly sanded the top and the sides again, but in the areas where I had some streaks, I sanded a little bit harder. And then I applied the same tinted polyurethane over it, but this time I used the roller. Once this tinted coat dried, I applied another coat, but this time it was clear poly. This is the hardware I was going to use for the sideboard, and I just love it. I love the shape of it. The only thing, it came in this dusty rose gold color, and I wanted it to be in a brass color, so I spray painted with brass lacquer. While I was drilling the holes for the new hardware, I noticed that one of the joints went loose. I don't know how I missed it while I was sanding and painting, but it's better later than never. I squeezed some wood glue in there, clamped the joint, and left it to dry for about 1 hour. Before attaching the doors, I decided to put back my beautiful base with beautiful legs. And then I attached the doors, but we're not done yet. The final step to attach the back panel, which I had taken off and painted off camera again. Sorry about that, guys. I'm starting to suspect that there is something wrong with my SD card or with my camera, because last time I thought there was something wrong with me and I deleted the footages, but this time I didn't touch anything and there's still lots of footages missing. And finally, we are done here. Let me remind you how this sideboard or dresser looked before, and here's how it looks now. I made some mistakes, yes I did. Even if I have 3 years of the experience in refinishing furniture, I still make them. But at the end, I really love how it turned out. What do you think? This is one of the doors, and with this bright light pointing straight at it, you can see my repairs, but in reality, I promise it was almost invisible. I want to say a huge thank you for all of your support, for your likes and comments. I really appreciate that and it means a world to me. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in my next video.